Welcome to the Simpleton Podcast, the most popular podcast in the Eternal Kingdom. And it's come to our attention that in our small listening audience, there could be a few secret celebrity listeners.
There could be.
And in particular, Taylor Swift might be listening to this podcast.
She might be.
And the way you're going to know she really is if her publicist or even herself denies listening to our podcast. So keep an eye out for that. You know, we know there's some secret celebrities who are listening right now. Laura, the podcast for today, we're going to go over, part of the reason why we started this podcast to begin with is just how much the world has been changing and trying to get some bearing on that and bearing on what it means to be Catholic and like what the kingdom looks like within this world, Mm-hmm. And just kind of common sense approach to it, I guess. But our ideas have been changing even since we began the podcast.
Yep.
And this podcast is going to go over some of those idea changes. We're going to talk about Bo Jackson's legendary run for president in 2016, his platform and how it changed. He ran on the Turkey Party. We're going to talk about what historians will say about our current period in time, and are you on the right side of history? You need to make sure you listen to make sure you're on the right side of history. The Constitution, the most powerful document ever written, and yet it's not as powerful as you think it is. We're going to talk about immigration, and we're also going to talk about what a populist solution would look like to the current problem.
Okay.
Are you ready? Okay.
I'm ready. We just did a book club here in DC on faith in the future. That was a really good book.
Come to the Simpleton Simple House Book Club in KC or DC if you're local. All right. So in 2016, Hillary Clinton was running against Donald Trump. Some of you may remember this. And the world was kind of coming to an end because it was like, boy, this is a bad, choice. And people had like bumper stickers that said like giant meteor 2016, like done up as like a political ad. Like, can the world just end now? And during that time, I thought, this is terrible. And so on Facebook, I made this party called the Turkey Party, and I ran Bo Jackson for president, and I created a 10-point platform for him. And let's see how many of these ideas I still would stick to and how many of these ideas look dumb in hindsight.
This is really good because Bo knows, unlike Hillary or Donald or anybody else.
Bo knows, and Bo can just do it. He does everything, right? So he'd be the best president possible. All right. The first point of Bo Jackson's Turkey Party was no more cash. I don't think this plank has aged very well. It was before I understood what Bitcoin was. I think my whole thought was it was more efficient. You saved a lot of money. Why are we forcing everyone to have all these cash registers when, the credit card works so well?
Mm-hmm.
Right. In hindsight, I did not foresee the weaponization of the financial system where people got debanked. I also didn't foresee the amazing privacy benefits of cash. So I would withdraw this part of the platform.
Yeah. I don't think that since you wrote that, people have grown in trust enough of Bitcoin, et cetera.
That's true. But I actually was thinking like an electronic, like a credit card is in a sense a digital currency. It's not Bitcoin. It's not like a great one. I just meant let's just go to all electronic transactions and no cash transactions.
Okay. Yeah.
But I think now I don't.
For privacy's sake.
Yeah. And the way you can just get kicked off Visa. Yeah. If you're like a real political hated person.
If you're Kanye West or whoever. Yeah.
Right. So we don't want to do that. All right. Next point Bo Jackson ran on. One published price healthcare. Okay. The idea here is that a hospital can charge anything they want, but they can only choose one price for that procedure, and they have to make it publicly known, and every insurance company gets that price, cash pay customer gets that price, Medicare, Medicaid gets that price, right? Yeah. And then any health insurance could say, well, okay, we don't cover that hospital because their prices are too high. But what you can't do is you can't have like some secret agreement with this health insurer a different one with this one, and then kind of the person who just walks up and wants to pay cash kind of gets screwed because they don't have the same negotiating power as all those other entities.
Yeah. Well, it's our local hospital, the most local hospital is like, if you're a cash pay person, they're like, well, if you pay it today, we'll give you 50% off. But if you don't pay it today, this could be tens of thousands of dollars. If you don't pay it today, you don't get 50% off.
And that's like a weird hostage situation that I don't think exists in any other market.
Yeah.
And the other weird part about it is where this came up, our friend Jess Barnes,
and this is always after the fact, right? After you've been in the ER and your kid had a seizure and whatever the heck happened, Yeah.
You already purchased the product and now we're talking about the price.
Yeah.
Right? Like when you walk in, I can't, like if my kid has a broken arm, I can't call 4 hospitals and say, how much do you charge for arms?
Right.
You know what I mean? But like I could hypothetically before that have kind of studied the different hospital pricing structures and been like, this hospital seems like a deal and this hospital seems like they screw you and this hospital is a nonprofit and they seem to be really helping people with good prices. There's nothing like that, right?
Yeah.
So what's interesting about this though is I think this actually became law. I don't think the one price became law, but I think something about a published price has become federal law because I met a guy who works for the federal government working on this, working on trying how to regulate this and force this to happen. And what was interesting about my conversation with him was he did not believe that whatever the result was of his work was going to end up with me or someone who's just an outsider being able to search all these prices and figure out anything because medical billing's so complicated. His whole hope was that if we somehow force these hospitals and medical providers to create this database of prices, that then a nonprofit could come in, summarize it for you and give you ratings. Here's the Best Buy hospital in your area,
interesting.
Almost like a Consumer Reports type ranking of considering cost, and results,
Yeah.
So I think that is a huge step in the right direction. I still love the idea of one published price, and that you're not allowed to just charge different people different prices for the same procedure.
Right. Have you ever made the mistake of accepting Tylenol or something in the emergency room?
I no, and
because it's like a hundreds of dollar mistake.
Wow.
Anyway, yeah.
All right. Next point of the platform. So, all right. So first point, no more cash. Withdraw that. That does not look good in hindsight. Changed my mind. One published price healthcare. I still believe that. Let's go for it. Next one was permanent gun buyback. All right. I believed at this time that a lot of the bad things that happen with guns are happening with orphan guns. And what I meant by that was Uncle so-and-so had a gun. Uncle so-and-so's either in jail or dead or something like that. And there's this gun around the house that no one's really taking care of, and that this gun is much more likely to have a bad result come from it than, Joe down the street who's got this bunker under his house and a huge safe and has 100 guns. All those 100 guns are probably really safe, but this orphan gun in grandma's drawer is a problem, I now realize that, and I couldn't understand even at that time why conservatives in general were so anti-gun buyback programs. So a gun buyback program's like something they'd do in LA, where they'd say, hey, look, bring any gun you want up here. Every gun that comes to us, we're going to give you $200 of free groceries at the grocery store. And
or different gift cards they've done that in PG County. I think they've done it a lot of urban places.
Right. And that sounds like a pretty good idea to me. Why not? Right. It's not like gun lovers are going to bring their guns down.
Yeah.
It's just people who actually, if you want groceries instead of that gun, that's that's just saying that you don't really like guns. So give them up. The thing, though, that I think is wrong with it is there is a permanent gun buyback program and it's called the pawn shop. So it's irrelevant to do this. You're doing something weird when you make the federal government do it or any government do it, because pawn shops are doing it every single day. Like they'll just give you money to put on your bills if you hand over a gun. You know?
What happens like if the pawn shop gets like an unregistered gun or whatever? I don't even know what the
There's no law to register guns.
Right. Okay. So there we go. What
they
happens
get a lot
if
of unregistered guns?
Yeah. So they get a lot of unregistered guns. Yeah. Okay. There's no law to register guns, so never mind. Okay.
Like, I mean, there might be some somewhere, you know?
Yeah.
But I think the big thing that pawn shops are doing is like, if they get a gun, they have to put a serial number or something in a system. And if it comes back as stolen, it gets returned to the owner.
Okay. Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. So no longer for a government gun buyback because we already have the pawn shops. Next point of the platform. Ban foil condiment packets.
Okay, what the heck is this?
Well, you know what that is. Like when you go to...
No. Why? Because they cause explosions on your...
They're just so stupid.
Shirt.
I just thought this would win hearts and minds. I haven't seen a foil condiment packet in a while.
Well, do you prefer the plastic ones?
I do, but I don't know why. No, you like foil?
Well, I don't have a problem with the foil. The messy pump.
Oh, I like that too. I mean, then no condiment packets.
Really
that would be
squeeze the mayonnaise on there.
I do have to say that I think banning condiment packets would be a way better thing than banning straws.
But are yeah, okay. Are the foil ones ending up in the ocean in the same... I bet the plastic ones fly out of garbage trucks more easily than the foil ones.
I don't think flying out of garbage trucks is a real pollution problem.
It is a pollution problem. All right, anyway.
Okay, good. All right. Well, so you do not like that.
I think the foil condiment packet is preferable to me than the plastic one.
Okay, I now think that plank's irrelevant. It does not win hearts and minds. Get it off the platform. Next thing. Bring back reusable glass bottles. All right, I am now more for this point than I was back then. What would this look like? What if we just said that all stuff you buy in jars, let's start with jars, everything's going to be in the standard Mason quart, pint, or half pint size jar with the standard Mason lid.
Yeah.
Right. Kind of like the way Classico spaghetti sauce still uses Mason jars. Everything uses that. And then when we have glass recycling, what you're actually doing is not recycling the glass. You're putting it through like a washing technique, new labels on them, slap them out there.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that would be an enormous thing for, the environment. And I think these mason jars have great secondary uses as glasses and everything else and storage and all that.
I love that. And I am increasingly getting frustrated with, it's like we put stuff in recycling that we're like, this is just our second trash can. Cause I know a lot of the plastic stuff doesn't recycle well. Right. And
And glass recycling's not that efficient, but glass reusable containers are.
Yeah.
So the thing that bothers me about this point is like ketchup. Don't you need ketchup in something squeezy?
I mean, they used to be in the glass jars. Don't you remember like trying to push the ketchup out of the glass jar, like hitting the bottom of the glass jar?
Love it. We got it. All right. Going back to glass jars. I stand by this.
They were annoying. The ketchup in the glass jars was like an annoying feature of being a child in the 80s.
Instead of making everything Mason, you'll have all the Mason, and you'll have one other design jar that'll look like an old ketchup jar, and it will be for all salad dressings.
Barbecue sauce, salad dressing.
Barbecue sauces, everything like that. And if you make a product that's too darn thick to pour out, then just put it in a Mason jar, and we'll scoop it out.
Okay.
Solve all the world's problems.
Love it. I love that solution. Thank you, Bo Jackson.
Thank you, Bo Jackson. Yes. Next point Bo Jackson made was we need more residential based mental health programs. This is more true today than it was then. Simple House has even started Just Homes in the meantime. Just Homes is now its own entity providing mental health residential program. Also California, San Francisco was about this. Like, they need to start doing it out there. I think this has aged very well. Bo Jackson looks like a prophet.
Yeah.
All right. Next point. Win or quit the drug war. So either ramp it up and win or quit. I think I have no idea what we should do with it. We kind of did quit. It was a little bit prophetic. Like, we've kind of quit the marijuana part of the drug war. Yeah. I don't know what we should do with the rest of it.
Well, I'll say this is something that I'm maybe changing my mind about a little bit. I think I've kind of thought in the past, like I just didn't care if marijuana was legalized or not. And I thought, like, there's certainly people that abuse it. People abuse alcohol, and we, allow that in our society. But I don't know what to make of. I have friends that work in high schools that say the kids are high all day long. And they use edibles, and it's like, how can you even tell or catch someone, And the other thing is the higher percentage THC is really bad.
Those are two kind of unforeseen consequences, right?
Yeah.
This rise in edibles and this rise of extra potency. Yeah. Particularly in edibles.
Yeah.
I don't know. I still don't see how you stamp it out,
Yeah, I don't either. I think those are just unforeseen concerns I didn't have before. And seems to me like you can't totally just leave it alone, but I don't know.
And what's kind of interesting is I know a marijuana drug dealer who's illegal, right? And legalization has not driven him out of business.
Wow.
Isn't that weird? Yeah. He's still got a very active clientele for the illegal marijuana, even though marijuana is virtually legal. Yeah. I think, what I'd like to see with the drug war thing is if we could get our borders controlled better, and allow the amount of immigration that we choose to allow, all of that process would change the dynamic of the drug war some, and I'd like to see how it changed it. Yeah. Did that increase the price of drugs a lot because now we clamp down on some border security or what? I would like to see that, but I really don't know, on win or quit the drug war. I'm not so sure Bo is wrong. And by Bo, I mean Clark 2015 or 26. All right. Next point. The capital gains tax should equal the income tax. All right. This, I don't think most Americans even understand, but I tell you what, every rich American understands this. Capital gains is the return you make on an investment. So if you buy $100,000 of stock and it's worth $200,000, you have to pay taxes on that $100,000 increase. Right. Turns out the tax rate on that on capital gains is less than the income tax rate. So guys like Warren Buffett for a long time have pointed out that he makes I don't know what his actually wages are, his W-2 wages, but they're almost nothing because he makes all his money on stock appreciation. Yeah. And so do a lot of wealthy people. Right. And their job is literally managing a stock portfolio and they're not paying income tax. They're paying capital gains tax on all that income. Yeah. Right. And I don't understand why income tax isn't a little bit lower and capital gains tax is a little bit higher to the point that these things become essentially equal. Because I think if you're a dentist or if you're somebody who's a higher income, upper middle class person, but still making a W-2, you're getting taxed unfairly compared to the guy next door who's a financial planner who's just managing or a day trader. Yeah. So the reason against this that people say is you want capital to accumulate in order to help investment in the economy. I think we've seen massive capital accumulation. I don't think we need this. I think it would be way better, more egalitarian. It just seems somehow totally unfair that W-2 wage earners pay higher marginal tax rates than really rich people buying and selling companies. But I don't hear Democrats or Republicans really touching this in a meaningful way, because I think it's too taboo. It's like all your wealthy donors don't want you to make capital gains equal income tax.
Yeah. I think, I should have asked Ryan what he would think about this, because his perspective would be from like home flipping, or.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, Home flipper is a great example, right? Like if you work all year redoing a home and flipping it, you are not paying income tax. You're paying capital gains.
Yeah, but you have a tiny margin sometimes. You spend all year.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this would change prices.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It would probably bring down home prices a little bit. Because there wouldn't be as much profit in flipping them and stuff, and there wouldn't be as many investors seeking to buy and resell as an investment, because investments are less profitable due to capital gains. So I don't know. There's something about it that just seems fundamentally wrong, that if I make my money this way, I don't pay income tax. I pay this other tax. If I make my money this way, I pay a much worse tax, income tax. And it seems like it really hurts these upper middle class guys who are still on W-2s.
Yeah.
All right. Next thing. I don't have a strong
clear position on that. Yeah.
I think I was a little bit more flagrant about it 7-8 years ago than I am now. I also think capital gains rates have increased. No second class citizens. All right. Let's talk about immigration, bigger picture here in a minute, about changes. But there's this growing problem that's like undeniable, that we have this large group of people in America who are not citizens, and they're not on visa. They aren't even foreign. They're just basically operating in an underground economy, right?
Yeah.
And this is an enormous problem because they have no reason to buy car insurance. They have no reason to do anything but a hit and run when they get in an accident. They have no reason to go to the police when they meet organized crime and get a shakedown from a cartel or whatever gang or whatever, right? And
they have no recourse for bad treatment.
Right. They have no rights when they're abused. If you're worried about human trafficking, they're easy victims, So it's just like this situation that I can't see a country with good rule of law having. And I think rule of law is one of the very rare things that we have. Like there's a lot of countries where no one pays taxes. Like the tax compliance rate's like 15%. And it's like, that's just a bad situation to be in if you believe in any type of good government, because you can't pay for anything, So I just think this is a bad situation. And so somehow we have to get rid of this like underground group. And you can get rid of them a couple ways. You could control immigration better and then help the ones here legalize. You could deport. You could do. I don't really have a huge opinion on that, but we got to do something.
Mm-hmm. I want to talk about that more fully, maybe in our broader immigration. But yeah.
Okay. No second class citizens. Now, the very last point of Bo Jackson was pushing was that the economic policy of the U.S. should mainly be focused on the business environment. I think that's just a real basic point.
The business environment or business and environment? Say that again.
Business environment.
Okay.
I'm not anti-environmentalism, or neither's Bo.
Yeah.
But like
neither's Bo.
You can do a lot of things pro-environment, but the point here would be, if you want a healthy economy, don't try to manage it. Try to have good roads, try to have good trade, try to have a secure environment where people can operate without getting ripped off. Try to have regulations that, are easier on the small guy,
Yeah.
I mean, we're at the point now where like large corporations can promote business regulation because they have the staff to handle it. Yeah. And they know their competitors that are smaller don't.
Yeah.
So they know how to stamp out those small guys by actually promoting regulation. But all right, that's Bo Jackson. I wish he would run again. But it is more interesting today. Like what we're seeing now in the presidential primaries is kind of interesting. What are your thoughts? I find that the rise of Vivek on the Republican side and the rise of RFK Jr. on the Democratic side, like these are real people with ideas. Whether or not you agree with them or not is something else, but they seem really sharp and like they have an agenda. You know?
With actual like kind of brass tacks. RFK, my impression is he's got really clear, defined ideas, even more so. But yeah, like this is exactly what I would do, and this is what it would accomplish. Not
right,
just...
and neither of them come off like as Trump does, and neither of them are like, I don't know what you'd say it. Neither of them disown Trump. Like they kind of both have talked about, even RFK has kind of talked about Trump as like a wake up call for the nation that like, we needed to go in a different direction. And he's like the populist uprising, and it's kind of interesting that way. All right. So a lot of those ideas have changed over the last 8 years, but now let's go to more recent history. The right side of history and what will historians say about our own time period. Mm-hmm. I'm going to start with a couple things to stir the pot. Recently, a folk music song hit the scene. What's the guy's name?
I always forget. It's either Oliver Anthony or Anthony Oliver.
Oliver Anthony.
Yeah,
and
sorry.
It's a stage name. He's got it's Chris somebody.
He's got
I think.
some other name. He's got another name. Yeah.
But he did Richmond, north of Richmond. He hit the scene. Now, what's interesting to me about this is, good song, whatever. Very popular, viral. His other music's now gone viral too. He's now on the podcast circuit, et cetera, et cetera. But, historically, folk musicians were left leaning, like Bob Dylan, and like all folk musicians were, like Woody Guthrie. And they kind of had a little bit of a progressive tinge to them about, hey, the world needs to change and needs to change in this direction of taking care of the common man and things like this, right? And now the way the political landscape is, this is part of like the sign of the times right now. I think it would be impossible to write a progressive folk song like that resonated at all. I think it would sound like a joke. People would wonder if you were being ironic if you took like a progressive platform and wrote a folk song. Yeah. So it's weird that shifted, like that the same way that like the richest counties in America are no longer Republican, they're all Democrat. The folk singers are now all Republican too. Yeah. Or maybe Republicans
he says he is not a Republican, by the way, and he said he was talking about the Republicans too, which not the whole song tracks with that, but
I don't think that tracks really. I think it tracks with establishment Republicans. He's not one of them.
I think the thing that I was going to say is like you hear a lot of left Democrat people that we like, a lot of them, I think that you and I tend to like a lot of them, say that the landscape has shifted under their feet,
Right. And I think people are waking up to that too. Like even hardcore people who were just, so anti-Trump, so pro-Democrat. And, I can see why they would be anti-Trump, I'm seeing more of them start waking up that like, wow, this is the party of power. This is like, if there is institutional racism, it's coming from this party because this is the party that controls everything. And by that party, I guess Democrat Republican doesn't.
It's like uniparty. I feel like if people are having the wake up, it's like uniparty versus reason. Right.
It's not really Republican Democrat. It's, establishment versus non-establishment or something. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So that's interesting. Another sign of the times is like in the Obama administration, when they were working on the gay marriage stuff, is the first time I think the right side of history term started getting thrown around. Like you want to be for this, because if you're not for this, you'll look really dumb in hindsight. Like
those racists that we studied in school or whatever. Right.
Like a segregationist or a a Nazi before Hitler came out as being such a bad guy or something like that. Right. So that was kind of weird, and it had a certain power and truthful ring to it. Like you had to get on this agenda because this agenda was going to win and was going to write history, I'm now hearing essentially not the same wording, but essentially the same idea said by populists or kind of conservative populists, where they'll like, I heard someone say something to the effect of like, someday they're going to give a tour of this hospital and they're going to point to that room and say, that's the room where they butchered the children and tried to make the boys into girls and the girls into boys. Yeah. You know, almost like you're like touring a Holocaust museum. Yeah. Right. And people are saying that with conviction, like this is going to look so bad, you know, and you don't want to be on that side. You don't want to say that you were for this. Yeah. You know, in hindsight. And I think that's interesting. You know, I don't really think, I'm not kind of trying to say either side is right or wrong in predicting how historians describe something. But what I like about it is they're like saying this is so obviously wrong. It's going to play out. It's
going to look stupid, you know, in the future. Yeah.
And I think that that's flipped.
Yeah. Well, we had an interesting discussion, Ryan Haber and Mary Smith and I, about being on the right side of history, which will come out soon.
So, soon. Great.
Yeah.
I look forward to that. The other thing, though, is when I've always thought about how historians were going to deal with our time period, I never thought of this way that we just talked about, this right, wrong side of history. I always thought in terms of like bloodletting. Mm-hmm. Like it was like, I remember sitting in middle school or high school and they would describe this like old practice of bloodletting and you just like your eyes would be wide open. Like they did what? Like they took a sick person who's dying and then bled them out as a cure, you know, like,
or do some leeches on their body.
Right. And it was just like, no way, you know, how could they have been how could they take a weak person and then just like bleed them?
Yeah.
You know, and think that this could be a good thing. You know, we're going to make them weaker, you know. But what really stuck to me, though, was that it went on for so long and that it was so accepted. And there must be things today we're doing that are that dumb. You know, and it could have been like in the 70s when so much lead was in the environment, when we used to make like, you know, water pipes out of lead, or like, what is our thing right now? And I don't know what our thing is right now. But I feel like we almost definitely have it. It could be social media use. It could be, you know, holding a cell phone up to your head as a bad idea. It could be, I don't know what, you know, but I know that one of these crazy people who's yelling that, you know, cell phones cause brain cancer or something like that, one of them's probably right.
One of them's got,
But there's 1,000 of them, you know?
Yeah.
And where this hit me was like, I remember when Hillary Clinton in 2016 election again, and I thought Hillary Clinton's going to win, and I thought she probably should have won over Trump. I've changed my mind on that, but I thought that was the right idea, you know? And I remember thinking, this is so unfortunate because like anyone outside the U.S. is going to look at the U.S. or anyone in the future, historians going to look at the U.S. and see that we had Bush and then Clinton and then Bush Jr. and then we're going to have another Clinton. Actually, no, I think this is when maybe Obama was running. It's going to look like there's two ruling families in America running things. They're called the Bushes and the Clintons.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And I thought that's not really the case. If you really understand America, you know that's not really the case.
Yeah.
And now when I'm like in the future, I'm like, oh, that might be the case.
Yeah. Not those families exclusively. But yeah. Right. I think part of our discussion, though, is like, it's like kind of, I think it's a kind of interesting little experiment, like, oh, what's going to look like, you know, leeches, you know, in the future. I think that's kind of interesting to think about, but that can't be your metric, you know, for right or wrong. And I think it's like interesting, even how much like the future judgment of the thing can change so much. Like when I was in elementary school, it was like, can you believe our country had racism and slavery? You know, how stupid was that? And that is not now what we say about that time period. You know, it's like, it's like our country is racist. It's not.
Oh, that's interesting. I now see what you're saying. Yeah. Like, it is true, though, that like, how do you understand that we were actually enslaving people, right? Like when that seems so obviously wrong. you know, in a historical context.
Yeah.
But you're actually saying that now we actually just think we're just as bad as those people.
I'm just saying that our future judges will be fickle.
Yes.
Yeah. And so it's not a good measuring stick or whatever. But
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. I guess I'm more curious about using this perspective. Like, I'm not really trying to predict what historians will say. I'm trying to use this perspective as a way to get some distance from what we're going through for insight's sake.
Well, I think just like as an example, it's like, you know, the low fat diet was a giant disaster, you know, and like Ryan and I are kind of like into health and when a new thing comes out, we're trying to like look at it from a broader, you know, is this a fad or is there, you know,
a deep truth here? So now if we're going to take this for insight, like you could use it on the health fad world, right? Or the health world, not just fads, but you could also use it on like our current political situation, right? Like, if you see that, you know, we've been at war for 20 years, as soon as we quit those wars, we find ourselves a new war to get into, the Ukraine war, right? That starts looking suspicious. It looks a lot like the military industrial complex drives our politics, right? If you see that like American poverty went up 5% last year.
Yeah.
And that's the most it's gone up since 2008, you know, or the 2008 period. I think 2010 is the last time it went up, you know. That's like crazy, you know, that we're not even talking about it, right? The murder rate went tremendously up since COVID, you know, or like there was $100 billion, I think it was $130 billion of unemployment fraud. The Government Accounting Office just put that out, that much unemployment fraud happened during COVID, 130 billion. All right. And
I mean, there was all kinds of other fraud, not just that happened during COVID.
Exactly. I'm just pointing out some.
That's one number. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that we in our moment are very prone. Like, I feel like I was kind of somehow innately raised to think in terms of like, oh, this program is too expensive or wastes money or whatever. And my first reaction is, well, you know, whenever you're well-intentioned doing something, there's going to be some waste or you're going to make some mistakes, but that doesn't mean they're bad people. It doesn't mean that there's bad intentions or anything like that.
Yeah.
Right. And then if you start seeing the number like never get fixed, then you're like, well, maybe government's just not good at doing it. Government's incompetent. So it's like first one is well-intentioned mistake. Next one is government incompetence. But there comes a point where you have to like draw the third conclusion, which is, this is basically organized crime.
Yeah.
Right. It could be that 130 billion of unemployment fraud is organized crime. You know, that was actually somewhat intentional. You know, or straight up intentional, right? In the way it was all written and done. Or it could be that you know, New York City has been sheltering immigrants at a cost of $9,000 a month per person. Okay, they're going bankrupt from this, and the mayor's going nuts about this because they've got an over $1 billion charge every year on this.
So I'm sorry, that's $108,000
a
year per person.
Per person.
So it's like $40-some thousand and higher than the average salary. Right? Like what? Yeah.
and there's New Yorkers leaving New York because they can't afford it. And if you just gave them a small fraction,
that's per person, not per family.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So is that well-intentioned mismanagement? Is that government sucks at doing stuff? It's waste. Or is that organized crime?
Yeah.
Right. I can tell you that Simple House would gladly shelter those illegal immigrants for $8,000.
Yeah.
I could start a nonprofit all day long and shelter people for $8,000 and I could feed and clothe them and do everything and pay staff and I'd be fine. Right. But I'm not going to be allowed to, you know. So then it's kind of like, looks like the mafia, where like the mafia would like work with a labor union or a construction company and control bids for a project. And then it's like they're kind of the whole thing's corrupt. Like the labor contract's corrupt. The bidding process is corrupt. The cost of materials or the concrete, maybe they own the concrete company or something like that is corrupt, and they're just milking it everywhere, right? And it's hard to point at, and the mafia's greatest strength was always saying they don't even exist.
Right.
You know, and so I think we're just getting to the point that like we need to think that there could be just organized crime involved in this stuff.
I think that's possible, but I think also,
I guess my question is, what I'm saying is, would a historian think there's overwhelming evidence for it and he wouldn't even doubt it? Whereas we're like in the moment and we're like,
yes,
oh, it's possible. Maybe I could think that's really dark to think that way. But the historian be like, oh yeah, organized crime.
Yeah. I just wanted to point out that we like distinguish between negligence and criminal negligence, you know?
That's true. That's true.
Yeah.
But I think that's my point though, is negligence would be bad government. Criminal negligence would be deliberately bad government.
Yeah.
Like lobbyists and other people are steering this so that it is that bad, you know, creating it on purpose.
Yeah. There was a thing several years ago where the Puerto Rican government paid like $500 each for traffic barrels or something like that.
Well, there was. Let's just say for a fact there was someone very happy.
There was someone very happy.
Yeah, and that person may have had a hand in the process.
Yes, Puerto Ricans are very good at memes, and there were a lot of great memes coming out with like the governor wearing a traffic barrel like suit and stuff.
That's great.
Yeah, but
okay, so that's kind of where my mind has changed, I guess. Even in the last 6 months, is I've become more worried that the wrong things that are happening are more deliberate, and the waste is so large it cannot be explained any other way.
Yeah, I think in the I've always tended to be kind of more trusting and assume goodwill, you know, and I feel like the last, you know, 3 years have. Yeah,
that was interesting in the Bishop Johnston interview we did when we were trying to ask him, like, how do bishops work, you know? And he's like, well, I always approach a situation assuming goodwill. But then he said, you know, but after I approach it that way, if I discern there's not goodwill, you know? Yeah. And I think that sometimes we approach situations with almost so much goodwill assumption that we're letting perpetrators and criminality go.
Yes. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
You could almost argue that a lot of that happened during the church sex abuse crisis. Mm-hmm. You know, that there was just so much assumption that, you know, this amount of criminality couldn't be true.
Yes.
That we were allowing abusers to flourish.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah. So clearly, I hate to put it this way, but there are people who hate you. There are people who hate the church. There are people who want to tear things apart.
Their interests are not, aligned with yours.
And there are people who just want to, you know, profit, you know? Yeah. And this has always been true in history, and it's true right now. And we have to be, I feel like my eyes are more open to that than before. Yeah. Okay. The Constitution. My mind has shifted about the Constitution. I believe the Constitution is one of the best documents ever written. I believe it is the most powerful document maybe in existence today, all that being true. But I find it really, I've kind of lost faith in it in a way that increases my, I think increases the importance of culture and society and decreases the importance of the written Constitution. And what I mean by that is this, is like, we had a constitution in the 19th century that was over an incredibly small federal government, and it made sense. And now we have the largest federal government that's ever existed, and it's the same constitution. Mm-hmm. Right. And that's weird. That kind of shows that the letter of the Constitution is not what's driving the federal government. It's constantly being reinterpreted, which I always kind of knew, but I didn't realize how dramatic, you know? Yeah. And I think like with this like pro-life thing that's happened where we've reversed Roe v. Wade, I think the pro-life movement for a long time realized that they were just not going to win overtly politically, more or less, and that they needed to change the hearts and minds of the people. Yeah. Right. And I think they were making progress at that. Right. Yeah. And I think ultimately, if you want a constitution that protects life, you have to make a society that wants to protect life.
Yeah.
That the letter of the law is not much of a defense.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
I think we see that with like freedom of speech and stuff, like with all the stuff that came out with the Twitter files, how the government overtly is suppressing certain stories, suppressing certain voices. This is clearly not what anybody who wrote the Constitution intended or wanted, you know, and yet no one has gone to jail for it. No one's been charged for it. And yet we also see what's happening where, even if you disagree with this, you have to say that more than half of America now believes that the Justice Department has been weaponized by the legislator, by against certain legislative foes like Donald Trump. The Justice Department's been weaponized there, that the January 6th protesters, the way they've been treated, or let's call them rioters, those people have been treated very differently than the Black Lives Matter rioters, or the ones that even rioted and burned down the church in front of the White House, you know, and threatened the White House. Those people are not treated the same, you know? So what's up with the separation of powers idea? What's up with equal protection under the law? Like, these things have to be like desired by the nation for the Constitution to work. Right.
Yep.
All right. So my mind's different about the Constitution. All right. By the way, we're saving the most interesting topic for last, this idea of a populist solution. Or I almost want to call it a populist savior, but I'm religious and I don't like that term.
No, yeah.
So what are you thinking?
Well, can I launch into immigration?
Right, go for it.
I guess. So I don't know if you have, I have an idea about the way my mind has changed about this. I had been sort of seeing immigration as like protecting the good of, you know, a local community or a country, right? Or your home versus, you know, the good of the stranger needing help. And it's like, how do you balance these two goods that are kind of opposed to each other? And where do you draw that line, you know? And I think also, like, you know, with the words of Jesus, like, I was a stranger and you welcomed me, being an important principle in my mind, you know. And I am really disturbed by this idea that we might be missing 85,000 children right now. And no one can answer this or say true, false, really, you know, or will answer it. Maybe they can and they won't, you know. And allegations that we're trafficking children for sex and for cheap labor into abusive conditions, you know. And I think that seeing it in this dichotomy that I saw it before is like a very incomplete picture, you know. So that's.
I think I agree with the shift that, like, I've dramatically changed exactly on the same issue you have, but like I feel like that idea that like allowing immigration was the merciful thing. I think that I had that idea maybe 8-9 years ago, you know?
Yeah.
But then this idea of the second class citizens, that there's this like desire to exploit a group of people in America and to have non-legal people here for industry, for homekeepers, and this idea that, hey, I hire so-and-so who's undocumented to be my housekeeper because I'm helping her out. Well, actually, this whole system's not helping her out. You know what I mean? And I also, so I realized that was kind of wrong already.
Okay, yeah. I think we talked about this in another podcast too, except I do know people that like have come here and worked as a housekeeper, and husband has worked under the table construction and they've like built a life here, you know? So. Right.
I still don't think that's a good system for them. I think there's a far better one. It would just be like, allow legal. I kind of knew that something. I'm trying to say where I came from to where I am now, right?
Sure. Sorry.
So where I came from was knowing that second class citizens was bad for the country. Mm-hmm. You know, not that, like you said, there isn't someone who made it work, but overall, that's a very bad policy to have second-class citizens, right?
Yeah.
Or they're not even citizens, just second-class people in your society, right?
Yeah, kind of.
And I also knew there was a lot of lying happening because I even went to a Catholic political conference where people were saying that, hey, we used to be able to, whenever a woman came to the border, she'd say that her husband abused her at home, and that was grounds for like political asylum. Mm-hmm. Right. Even though that doesn't really make sense. Right.
Yeah. Like that's not exactly political asylum. Yeah.
Right. Like, why don't just go to your mom's house or go anywhere else in your own country away from your husband? You'd probably be okay, you know, or why do you need to be in America because you had a bad husband at home? Right. And there's no way to prove it. It's just like that just means we're sheltering every single woman under a political asylum claim. Right. Yeah. So I knew there was and then when Trump, I think, made that not a valid reason anymore, or somebody made that not a valid reason for political asylum. I saw people who were at the Catholic conference arguing that this is so horrible because now we can't force all these people through the system. Mm-hmm. And it was very clear they weren't saying it's so horrible because these women are going to be beaten at home. They were saying it's so horrible because we can't get as many immigrants in. So then it was like, well, that's not really the Catholic view, you know, that just more immigration better. Mm-hmm. You know, and this is not really about helping the stranger. You're just mad that you can't abuse the process, you know? So I kind of knew there was something awry, I guess. Does that make sense? I don't understand. Do you follow that?
You think they were more concerned about getting large numbers than helping the large number of women that they assumed were in trouble? Like, I don't understand. I don't think
they assumed the women were in trouble. I think they just thought they should say that so they could get in. And closing that loophole, and they considered it a loophole to get them in, you know, and this became clear, not just because of their talk, but because of the question, because there were people in the audience who were just like little old ladies who'd come, you know, from rural areas to the conference, and they were asking questions. And the way the presenter reacted to them and said that you don't really have a Catholic view of the world if you don't think we're allowed to like use these arguments to get people in the country and things like this, I started realizing, there's a lot of people who are just for immigration by hook or by crook. You know what I mean?
Okay.
Not about real political, like they don't care about real political asylum. Yeah. You know, they care about getting as many people in as they can any which way, you know? So I kind of knew that was already awry, right? Mm-hmm. Now the thing, and then we did a little episode where we talked about these missing children, right? And my sense was probably they're not really missing. It's just we're not tracking, and they're probably being reunited with their families, et cetera, you know. But now I don't know that. I don't really feel that way right now. Two things that changed my mind was seeing the video of the guy the human trafficker swim across the Rio Grande, I believe, and just drop a very small child at the border wall, just abandoned at the border wall, knowing that, you know, Border Patrol would pick it up, pick up the child. That does not seem like what I thought was happening, you know?
And it was like, obviously, Did it seem to you like it was like a smuggler, right? It wasn't like this kid's dad. It was like a person that...
Right. I believe it was a smuggler, but who knows, you know, but just seeing someone, but even if you are the kid's dad, are you really turning your kid over to the Border Patrol with no paperwork? And then you're going to walk in and somehow think you're getting reunited with that kid?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know a parent who thinks that way. Right. And then I talked to a Border Patrol agent this summer, and this agent did not work on the southern border, but all Border Patrol people have to do so much time on the southern border because it's such a mess. And when this person was there, they had someone from a faraway country, not Mexico, not Latin America, and they were interviewing that person to see like political asylum or whatever. And while the interviewing was happening, he was interviewing a woman, and her shirt started to get wet. And he knew that this was from breast milk, right? Mm-hmm. And he said, "Where is your baby?" And the woman had been going through this interview, kind of trying to give the right answers, which they're kind of schooled to give. And then she just busted down crying. And she said that she turned over her baby to a coyote or something to get across the border and given them all this money. And she has no idea where this baby is. right? I mean, I don't think she'd given up hope that she wouldn't get across and be reunited, but like, this is not, I mean, this is like how evil people flourish.
Yeah.
You know, yeah. And this woman, I mean, if you could imagine getting all the way to the border and then finding out that's what you need to do, or you have to turn around, or you're going to be exploited by the very people who are trafficking you or your child, and you can't do anything about it. You have no power. This is like super dark. I don't know. I guess I've gone from the point of like thinking this is not good to thinking this is really dark.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is it fair to say that, I don't know how our opinions have changed, but we're
I
very
think,
alarmed.
because I'm not, right. I'm like extremely alarmed. Right. And I think, it's like, I think you could either argue based on what we just said for like wide open borders or like very shut borders, you know? And I think I was not seeing the whole picture before. And it's like, I think policies that maybe looked kinder than what we had before, like more help for children, unaccompanied minors, actually turn out to be like a vehicle for a lot of cruelty.
And I think that this all reminds me of something my dad said. My dad passed last year, but like many years ago, I was very pro-immigration. I went to my dad and he said, I think we need to get control of the borders. And I said, well, why aren't you pro-immigration? And he just looks at me and he goes, I didn't say I wasn't pro-immigration.
Yeah.
He goes, I just think we should have control of how much immigration, and then we can have a discussion on how much.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And the wisdom of that statement, you know, now it's probably been 8 years since he said that. It's just like more true now. It felt then, you know?
Right.
Then I was like, oh yeah, he's not anti-immigration. He just wants legal immigration. And then I kind of came up with anyway.
Yeah.
So that's that. All right. Now for the most interesting idea we have. What should we call this? A populist savior or a populist, like what is the political
hero?
A populist hero. Okay. That's a good one. All right. So there's two political thinkers that have each suggested the same idea, and I'm kind of won over by this idea. Okay. So there's a problem in the current system, and we all know it. And Donald Trump was part of the bringing it to light, you know, the frustration with the current system, elected Donald Trump. Okay. Now, two thinkers. One is Thomas Frank. So Thomas Frank, interestingly enough, is from Kansas City, but he lives in Bethesda near you. All right. He's great. I'm not trying to endorse him in the sense of all his thought, but I love listening to him on podcasts. He's just a guy who's always dropping interesting insights and things like this for you to just consider, you know. He's kind of an FDR Democrat.
Okay.
So, and he's kind of a, he wrote the book, What's the Matter with Kansas? He also wrote a book on populist movements. He's a history PhD. He's kind of an expert on populism, right? And he would think that FDR was a great populist leader. He believes that what we need now is a solution that's going to like handle all the populist concerns, but that the real hero of these movements doesn't come from the populace. It actually comes from the elites, right? That someone's going to come like a Roosevelt, who is a old money Manhattan guy, you know, there's going to be a solution like that, like someone who is elite, who kind of like marries the concerns of the populace with the concerns of the elites and brings the nation forward. Right now, this doesn't have to happen in his mind. I think we could just go downhill and become a terrible country. But like, if we're going to go forward, that's the solution, is someone who is an elite taking the populist concerns seriously and fixing the problem. All right. On the other side of the spectrum, there's another very interesting political thinker that I also love to listen to on podcasts, named Curtis Yarvin. And he'll say he's a monarchist. He's also a fan of FDR because he believes FDR was an American monarch.
Okay.
You know, and what he defines as a monarch is not like a hereditary monarch. He defines a monarch as just someone who like the buck stops with them. You know, like if you, on any of our last presidents, if you said, hey, this isn't going right, they'd blame Congress or blame some other group, right? They weren't actually say, oh, no, I have the power. Right. Whereas like FDR would have been like, oh, no, I run things.
Yeah.
I get credit and I get blame because I run things, because I am actually in charge. Right. So the best argument for him is that he'll say, like, look at every major company. None of them are run by legislatures. They're all run by one single person in charge. And you can replace that person. But ultimately, it's just one person in charge that runs things the best. Right. So that's his position. Right. Now, he also has this idea, and he likes to use Lord of the Rings analogies. So he'll say, the people in the red states are the hobbits, and they honestly don't want to run things, and they honestly want to just like have Sunday dinner. Quiet life, go to football games. That's what they love. Right. And the hobbits are ruled by the elves, and the elves do really want to run things and benefit from running things. And they're kind of like the elites of society. Right. And the situation's gotten really bad right now because the elves are abusing the hobbits. Mm-hmm. And now the hobbits are like, we can't ignore politics any longer. We have to, get involved. Right. Now, the thing is, no hobbit leader can run the country. No matter how much you think hobbits are right, hobbits aren't really cut out to be leaders, is Yarvin's idea.
Okay.
So
this
what
is
does
like
that mean?
Kind of condescending, right? But
it's well, the funny thing is, like, Yarvin would say, if I could be a hobbit, I would be.
Yeah.
Like, because like the hobbits are more concerned with more deep truths in life, like family and love and religion, and living a good life, right? Which is honestly more rational than just like a lust for power. Or something, So a hobbit might be actually more enlightened than an elf. It is about, second and twosies lunch more than it is about, control.
11sies.
11sies. But so when hobbit leaders arise, they look like the old religious right, that has kind of died out, but like a resurrection of that. Or they could look like a constitutionalist who's like, you're not following the Constitution, or they could look like, the South Dakota governor. It was one of the Dakotas was running their governor for president. And he sees all of this as hopeless. Like the solution will not come from, someone who's always thumping the Constitution. It won't come from, a religious right type thing, like make America a Christian nation again. And it won't come from somebody from South Dakota. It's going to come from an elite. It's going to come from an elite who has so thoroughly understood progressivism and been educated in the belly of the beast that they like get it, and they get how it's wrong, and they love the hobbits. And he calls these people the dark elves. And
wait, they're the dark elves?
Yes.
Why are they the dark elves?
I don't know. The good guys to him are the dark elves. Whenever he says that, I think he means Richard Nixon, who like kind of was for the silent majority, but also was a fairly despicable person in private. And I don't think this person has to be despicable, but I think his idea is kind of sound that like he views like Clarence Thomas as like a real quality potential leader. Whereas like Amy Coney Barrett is just someone the right thought was like a nice, proper person, like there's a difference in like type there, and if you see like RFK Jr., if RFK Jr., if you look at his rhetoric, it's basically make America great again. He's MAGA. Yeah. Right. And no one wants to say that because it would ruin all his Democratic support. But everything he says is about going back to a healthier version of America. Yeah. Right. What's Vivek Ramaswamy, kind of the same thing. Right. And they're both like, I mean, Vivek is from Ohio, but it's pretty clear he's more of an elite class. He has like a pharma background, which makes you suspicious. Right. Yeah. So anyway,
I think go ahead.
Okay. I would like you to comment, but I want to just cap it by
finish
saying
up. Sure.
The cool part of this, or the interesting part to me, is that Thomas Frank, old liberal, Curtis Yarvin, really out there conservative, agree. Yeah. To me, it's like they both are pointing the same direction on the type of leader that gets you out of this problem. Go ahead.
Yeah. I think whether it can be a hobbit or not a hobbit, I think it's like someone has to have the perspective of understanding elite and not elite, or whatever, however, the hobbits and the elves, and you have to have somehow been able to gain a real life-based appreciation of those people, and love both.
I think that's right. Yeah. One of the things Yarvin keeps pointing out is that the elves or the elites are really afraid that if Red America takes over, that basically they're going up against the firing wall. You know what I mean? That their way of life will be destroyed by the red states. Right. Mm-hmm. And somehow we need to come up with a solution that keeps them from exploiting everyone, but doesn't destroy them. Because if your gig is to destroy the elites, you're just not going to succeed. Right.
And I think we need someone that sees we both come up together, because destroying either side is a disaster.
So what this actually is like Hegel, and what I mean by that is this idea of a return to a Christian nation or a Christian right or a constitutionalist. This is Hegel's idea of thesis, antithesis, synthesis, right? So these people who are the Christian right or the return of the Constitution, they're kind of say, let's go back to thesis. Mm-hmm. But you can never really go back to thesis. We've developed this antithesis where we've just decide everything in the thesis is terrible, but now it's become self-evident that the antithesis itself is terrible. And we have to take what's good from the beginning, what was good in the critique, and create the synthesis. And I think that's what these figures are trying to do.
Because you get the antithesis because there was a problem in the thesis, right? If the thesis is good, there's no...
I don't know. I'm torn. I mean, clearly some of the liberal critiques are correct, right?
Yeah.
But I'm torn by the liberal critiques right now. This is another way my mind's changing is what is the connecting thread between feminism, immigration, the environment, anti-racism, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And some people could say Marxism, but that's true-ish, but not really. Well, what's kind of true about it, and the weird way they'll stick up for Islam, but really Islam's the antithesis of everything else they believe. Mm-hmm. And it's the real uniting factor is just anti-Western.
Yeah.
They are trying to destroy Western civilization. And I think maybe they're trying to destroy it either because they have some deep-seated resentment or because they think that by destroying it, they will in fact come out on top. Right? You're not seeing this as powerfully as we did in 2020, where there was all this talk of just all these people just releasing their power to these minority, historically oppressed groups and let them run everything. And that all these things that we associate with Western civilization, even rights, are corruptions, what I mean? Or are used just different forms of institutional racism or something like this, I guess I just think the uniting thread is just, this is why, classical education is so powerful. I don't know. I don't really have any great conclusions on that, but I suspect that these guys are right. And I kind of think we're already seeing it in this primary debate. I just don't know that
it's a totally different flavor. Yeah.
I was watching an interview with RFK Jr. and he was like, well, they don't want Biden to ever be on the same stage and debate me. And I don't think he's bragging. It's of course they don't.
Yeah, he can't. Yeah, it's no.
Biden, that would be a disaster to put Biden on the same stage as you. And I just don't know that. I don't know how deep the corruption is and whether or not Vivek or RFK type approach could break through.
Yeah.
And that's not an endorsement for either of them, but that is an endorsement for the whole way of real policy ideas, mostly authentic beliefs, you know what I mean? Not just trying to say what everyone wants to hear when you stand up, Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. Pray to God. I mean, all this kind of centers me more in faith is so much more important, and that this is the faith that has brought people through bad regimes always, and that ultimately the kingdom of God is what's important, and secondarily the kingdom of the world, and it doesn't mean the kingdom of the world is totally unimportant. Like, we are to work for social justice and good government and things like this, but to the point you can't control it, you just have to, work on love, your spiritual life, your family, your parish,
Yeah. I loved the Faith in the Future book. I loved that book. And I think he talks a lot about like, what is the faith of Abraham, and it's like the faith in the future. And you can only really have faith in the future if you're looking towards heaven. Right. So.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, it's like somehow that's like the marriage between faith and hope. Trust in the future and hope for the future have to be together.
Yeah.
But our hope is much more a spiritual kingdom of God hope than it is that, the American political system gets fixed.
Right.
I don't know why. I mean, you and I have felt very powerfully that we need to like sort this a little bit for ourselves,
Yeah. Do you think it's, yeah. I think another thing that was interesting is that, in this book, he was Joseph Ratzinger back then, but Pope Benedict is saying, we feel very keenly that we're kind of at a crux in history and things are changing faster than they ever have before. And we feel like we need to answer, is faith still relevant? And he wrote that in 1969.
Right.
So I don't know, it's like, sometimes I wonder, is it just that I turned 40, but I think that in the last century, it's just the change is faster and faster. Right. And I think it's a lot of the things he said in that book are even more so true now, that there's just like it needs to be sorted, because like, what do we believe in?
Right.
Yeah.
There's also this thing where somebody did this recently when I was around. They said, it's just that we're so divided today and blah, 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 blah. And if only we weren't so divided. And it's kind of like, I kind of get annoyed by that idea. And my annoyance is like, well, America's been very divided before. Like, we were very divided in the civil rights movement and the sexual revolution and all that. We were very divided in the Civil War. We were very divided at the American Revolution, oftentimes to the point of killing each other.
Yeah.
And I think now, now that we have so many enormous federal programs, right? Like, you can't get a group of Catholics together who share so much in common and get them to agree on education.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
How are you going to have a Department of Education for the whole nation get people to agree on education?
Yeah.
I think division at some level is a sign of health.
Right. And I get annoyed by that sometimes, because I feel like it's like a cop out, like, oh, it's, if only we could listen to each other and communicate, then everything would be better. And I'm like, no, there are some bad ideas out there right now.
Right. But I just even think like all of these, I believe the federal government's way too big right now, both in its like policing of the whole world, but also in like, we see very big differences between the poverty situation of Washington, D.C. and Kansas City. Right.
Yeah.
And this isn't just these two cities. There's a huge difference between Cleveland, Ohio and New York City. And the idea that the same food stamp program operates in both places, I mean, that's the most basic program, doesn't make a ton of sense.
Yeah.
The problems of one place are not the problems of the other. Right. Yeah. And that you have a blanket solution for a whole nation doesn't make sense to me, And the idea that we'd have like vigorous division and discourse about all these enormous programs that are poor fits, is good.
Yeah.
In my mind. Yeah. And I think is a sign that probably we need to kick those programs down to a more state level. Mm-hmm. Even if you believe in that as a government program, I think a state program would be better than a national program. But anyway, all right. So praise be to God. I'm trying to end on a hopeful note. What's your hopeful note, Laura?
Read Faith in the Future.
That's great. All right. Good book recommendation. All right.
Yeah.
Like, subscribe, share. Thank you for listening to Simpleton Podcast. And Taylor Swift, we know you're out there. You can like and subscribe too. We won't out you. All right. Bye-bye.